Good morning and welcome to Sunday Politics Scotland. Coming up on the programme today. David Cameron will now make his much-trailed Europe speech this week. So, in theory, if there's a yes vote in the independence referendum, 2015 could see a Scottish government negotiating to hug Brussels closer, whilst a Westminster government could manoeuvre to pull in the opposite direction. We'll be talking live to the UKIP leader Nigel Farage and the SNP MEP Alan Smith. It's been 20 years since the Czech and Slovak republics separated in the Velvet Divorce. As time moves on, we ask if there are any big lessons to be learned from how they negotiated their parting. And as MSPs look at ways to further reduce teen pregnancy, we ask why is it so high in the country's poorer areas? Thanks for joining us now. It was a speech that never was, but David Cameron still plans to set out his vision for the UK's future in Europe this week, with plenty of red meat to satisfy Tory Eurosceptics. There are two intertwined strands to this debate, of course, as we in Scotland debate independence in Europe. Raymond Buchanan examines how Edinburgh and London view Brussels in their very different ways.
Welcome to European politics. The latest EU deal struck last Friday was about fish. It's a subject that unites the SNP and the Scottish Conservatives. Both parties want the way European deals like this are done radically changed. But on other issues, they're not so united. Not least on how close a relationship Scotland and Britain should have with the EU. David Cameron's cancelled Amsterdam speech was to argue for a new European deal, warning the institutions were increasingly isolated from the people they were supposed to serve.
The SNP's policy on Europe is becoming more pragmatic, at the same time much clearer in terms of returning to the original narrative. So we want an independent Scotland in Europe. This is very clear, and it's quite distinct from Westminster politics. It is very likely that the SNP will decide that this could be one of its strong cards in the end. And we shall see how Europe plays into the referendum debate.
Later this week, the Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon will give a speech in Dublin outlining the SNP's vision for an independent Scotland at the heart of Europe. She'll contrast the certainty of her party's commitment to the EU with David Cameron's questioning of it. So which one of these is closest to the Scottish people?
When we've had the evidence about Scottish attitudes towards the European Union, they've perhaps been a little more pro-European than the UK as a whole. But given the UK at the moment is in a pretty Eurosceptic mood, I think we actually have to presume that Scotland is also, so far as public opinion is concerned, predominantly in a Eurosceptic mood.
And if that's correct, it may question the SNP's strategy of being avowedly pro-European, a stance not shared by all nationalists.
It's very ironic because the Yes campaign is not Eurosceptic in itself. There may well be people in it who are secretly Eurosceptics, but the official campaign just echoes what the boss says. And if Alex Salmond says we're going to be in Europe, you'd better like it.
David Cameron too has faced criticism from his own side, not least from the former Deputy Prime Minister Michael Heseltine, who told the Financial Times Mr Cameron's European strategy was ill-advised and potentially damaging to business. European politics has often been messy, but this week's Fish Talks teaches a deal is often done. The question is what kind of relationship Scotland and Britain want with their near neighbours.
Well, I'm now joined from London by the leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage, and from our Edinburgh studio by Alan Smith, the SNP MEP. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you both very much for joining me. First of all, to you, Nigel Farage in London, are you hoping to capitalise on Cameron's European moves here in Scotland?
Well, I think that the whole Scottish debate really has been very odd because this whole campaign the SNP have led for independence well, I'm sorry, but you can't be independent if you also want to be part of the European Union. So I think the whole Scottish debate, apropos its relationship with the United Kingdom and Europe, really is being redefined in quite a radical way. And I never thought I'd say this, but thank you, Mr. Barroso, the President of the European Commission, for making it absolutely clear that if Scotland were to leave the United Kingdom, she would have to sign a new treaty that would commit her to signing up to the single currency. So that, I think, has perhaps made a bigger difference in the Scottish debate than anything that's happened before.
Yes, but just before we turn to the SNP, I mean, your party attracts Eurosceptics, of course, but perhaps in Scotland we view things a little differently, and you maybe won't capitalise on that. You probably only get about 3% of the vote here in Scotland.
Well, I think the reason that UKIP have done poorly in Scotland compared to the rest of the United Kingdom is because, as I said earlier, the word independence meant something different in Scottish politics because it had never really been properly examined. Now I think people can see increasingly that what is being offered for Scotland isn't independence. It is, in fact, an even deeper dependency and a total loss of democracy to European institutions. I think now that cat is out of the bag, and recent opinion polls back this up. We're now in a position where UKIP can start to make some real advances in Scotland too. OK, Alan Smith, a very clear statement from Mr. Farage there. I mean, you're probably hoping to capitalise on Cameron's moves, but it seems as though you're maybe slightly exposed now. What does independence really mean, do you think?
Well, you know, I was coming in the taxi here this morning and actually made a decision to be nice to Nigel and praise some of the advances that they've been doing in England. They've played a clever game to appeal to disgruntled white Middle England. But somebody should probably hold my jacket. I mean, yes, that's a very clear statement from Nigel, but it's completely fictitious. President Barroso absolutely did not say that there would be a new treaty. He made clear that if a state leaves and doesn't negotiate to remain within, then that's a third country. That will not be the case that Scotland will find ourselves in if and as and when, and I hope we do vote yes, within our referendum. Now, we have allowed in Scotland for 40-odd years Scotland's interests to be decided and Scotland's interests to be represented by successive UK ministers who have neither shared our interests nor articulated them well. It's not surprising that we've not had the best outcome that we could have done by representing ourselves within the European family of nations. The idea that Ireland, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Germany are not independent states is absurd, flatly absurd from UKIP, and this is where I'm glad to see UKIP actually getting asked some difficult questions. Because the EU is a way of pooling sovereignty and working with our friends and neighbours to work to achieve more than we could individually. Yes, the EU absolutely needs reformed, but in order to do that, you need to be at the table doing some heavy lifting, not posturing from the sidelines like Nigel and his cronies are. Well,
Nigel, putting that point to you, I mean, we're hearing from the SNP, the Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, saying if the UK pulls out of Europe, it will have, as she quoted Nick Clegg, a chilling effect, better, as Alan Smith says, to perhaps be at the heart of Europe rather than carping from the sidelines, as Mr. Smith puts it.
Well, what would happen to Scottish fisheries if Britain was outside the European Union? I'll tell you, we'd be like Norway. You would have a 200-mile exclusive economic zone, and the fish in those waters and the management of them would purely be the responsibility of elected Scottish officials. That would mean tens of thousands more jobs in the Scottish fishing industry alone. And I just don't buy these scare stories that if we weren't part of the European Union, we couldn't go on doing business with them. I tell you something, Mercedes and Volkswagen will want to keep selling their cars in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, regardless whether we're part of that political union or not. But at the heart of this is you cannot be an independent, self-governing democracy if more than 75% of your laws are made by a foreign set of institutions, and Scotland, if it were an individual member state of the European Union, would frankly be so small it would be irrelevant.
OK, well, Alan Smith, I want to pick up on that because Nigel Farage saying about the common fisheries policy, you want that renegotiated. You're not happy with the common agricultural policy. You went through the lobby with Labour last autumn voting against the budget. You're not exactly as pro-European, perhaps, as you portray yourself to be.
Well, this is where, with respect, I think the whole terms of the debate over Europe within these islands is just wrong because it tries to drill down into black and white, pro or anti. The SNP, the first, last and only question for us is what is in Scotland's best interests? Now, it is in our best interest to be part of the European framework. That doesn't mean we think everything in the EU is super. There's lots of things within EU policy I would happily see reformed. Getting rid of our ruinous trip to Strasbourg once a month, which isn't good for wear and tear on MEP peas if it's a small factor in your considerations. There's lots of things about the EU that do need to be changed. But Nigel makes the point, and again he's made this point repeatedly, unchallenged, about Norway. When I was first elected in 2004, I specifically sought membership of the Switzerland, Iceland, Norway delegation of the Parliament. Every 6 months we go to them, every 6 months they come to us. And the Norwegians have just concluded a 20-year study of the functioning of the EEA agreement. And they have concluded that Norway is actually more integrated into the EU's body of law than the UK is, by virtue of the fact that they're fully signed up to the Schengen Accords,
right,
where we're actually not. Now, the idea that you can somehow be in but not out, but you can still trade, but you don't need common rules, is a fallacy, and it's a delusional fallacy that UKIP has been very successfully promoting, because I'll say this for Nigel, you are a world-class snake oil salesman, but it doesn't mean that you're not selling snake oil, and the people of Scotland aren't buying it.
Alan Smith, I just want to pick up on that point, though, about Norway and so on. We've got a lot of people here saying in Scotland, well, the SNP aren't exactly being clear about what might happen with the euro and what might happen with Schengen border controls. I mean, the SNP aren't exactly being clear on that, are they?
Well, yes, we are, if you take the time to actually read what it is we're saying. We have always been clear that there will be a renegotiation of our membership from a region of a member state to a member state in our own right. That will be running concurrent and parallel to the talks that we'll be having with the London government post a yes vote. And what is very clear is that the EU will not want to lose us. We don't want to leave. So we renegotiate from within, and then we can be part of the coalition for change. Now, the reason why Prime Minister Cameron, in his disastrous non-speech, went to the Netherlands was because the Netherlands is presently doing a review of their EU arrangements. That's a positive thing, as are the Finns, as is the UK. Other ways of doing this are possible.
Nigel Farage, I just want to pick up on the point about border controls, which is something that you often pick up. You talk about the when border controls are relaxed in January 2014, about a possible influx, as you put it, of Romanians and Bulgarians. But do you appreciate the attitude in Scotland might be slightly different in that regard?
Yes, I mean, Scotland has not seen the massive migratory inward flow that London and the South East, particularly in England, has seen. Also parts of Eastern England too. And really, I mean, my attitude towards foreign workers coming to Britain is if we've got skilled people that want to come to this country, that's great. But we shouldn't discriminate in favour of people from Europe and against people from the rest of the world. We should do it as the Australians do on the basis of skills. The real anger in England at the moment, and this will spread to Scotland, is that from next year we're letting in two incredibly poor countries, in Bulgaria's case half of them nearly at or below the poverty line, and those people will be entitled to come not just to work but to gain access to the benefit system immediately. And this is going to become one of the hottest issues in British politics.
Alan Smith, what's the SNP's policy on that?
Well, I always get pretty uncomfortable when I hear an English person talking about immigration because it just jars with my worldview. Anybody who lives, works, studies in Scotland is part of our common weal, part of the people of Scotland, and the people of Scotland are best placed to decide who lives here and what our arrangements with the rest of the world should be. Well, this is the thing that we all sign up to. Freedom of movement is a crucial, crucial part of the EU's raison d'etre. The way that we improve the position of Romania, Bulgaria is to make sure that our companies are trading with theirs in the single market, bringing their living standards up towards the European average. Immigration is a different issue in Scotland.
Nigel Farage, I just want to finally pick up on a point that you've made about warning Scots, if there was an independent Scotland, that they can't expect a blank cheque.
Well, the point is that the European Union is letting in poorer and poorer countries, Romania, Bulgaria, but don't forget that the EU imperialists even want Turkey to join the European Union. In fact, there is unanimity in British political parties, apart from UKIP, that Turkey should join the European Union. And I would say this to you, you will become a net payer into a system where you will not be allowed to catch your own fish in your own waters. And frankly, you know, the European Union is good for professional career politicians, but it's not good for ordinary people.
Alan Smith, a professional career politician, quick rebuttal from you on that point.
Well, I'm not sure I am a professional career politician, firstly, but the UK is already... Scotland is a net contributor to the UK is a net contributor to the EU. We pay into the EU budget and we get back access to the single market, the ability to represent ourselves with our friends and colleagues working to achieve better than we otherwise would. There's nothing wrong with EU membership that won't be put right by independence and speaking for ourselves.
Alan Smith, SNP MEP, and Nigel Farage.